there, welcome to our show. That's going to be a double bill, which I'm calling Tales of Crazy. Both were released in 2020. Both had a 4:3 ratio, which is very old fashioned, very much a silent film ratio, and they do deal with madness. Now, I'm going to cover The Lighthouse and I'm going to cover I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Two different films, but very similar films. Now, The Lighthouse, I'm not going to spoil that much because it's the it's how you see it really as it goes on. I ain't saying too much about it, will spoil it. I'm Thinking of Ending Things, I'll give a general impression of, then I'll give some spoilers. So that's why it's the second part of the video. Because you can't really talk about it without spoiling it, really, ultimately. Well, I think The Lighthouse, you can. And also, I think The Lighthouse is the better film. Of both of these films, the one I'd recommend much higher than the other is The Lighthouse. I really like The Lighthouse. I'm Thinking of Ending Things I have some real problems with, which I'll get into. But The Lighthouse is Robert Eggers' follow-up to The Witch. I've not seen The Witch yet. I haven't watched it yet. But I've now seen The Lighthouse. Starring two actors I think are really good, Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. This is a wonderful film, very dark, very funny actually, and very paranoid. It's about these two guys who are manning the lighthouse during a shift of a month. And basically, one guy who runs the lighthouse, played by Willem Dafoe, has been there for years, and he runs it. He has someone else. He always has someone else doing the dog's body work. The person who used to do it left, and now it's Robert Pattinson, who just came in from further north. His past is a bit dubious. No one's quite. He doesn't quite. No, you're not meant to trust his story of where he actually came from. It feels like he's lying, basically, and that's what comes through is a sense of paranoia between both of them. Because as the story goes on, you start to see everyone's got their own way of lying. Everyone's got their own sense of truth, and you shouldn't trust either of them, ultimately. And there's some fantastical things with mermaids and things like that, which come up really early, so I'm not spoiling anything. It comes up pretty quick. And it is a kind of unreliable narrator kind of story where you're following Pattinson as he goes on, but you shouldn't really trust what he's saying or what he's seen, because he's not exactly the sanest people, and neither's Defoe. And a storm hits just as when they're meant to go off for after the month. That's when the storm hits, and they're stuck there. No, that's one of the reasons why it's such a hard job. Is if a storm hits, you're stuck there, and you have to deal with what provisions you have for more than a month, and they don't know when they're going to get rescued because the storm keeps going, and they start to slowly go crazy, and you can't tell how long they've been there for. How's time passing? Because for one, time seems to pass quicker than for the other one. You're not sure if it's because one of them's drinking too much or is blanking things out, or one of them's gone mad or whatever. It's just this intensity of interrelationships. An older man and a younger man, them try to deal with each other, try to deal with their sense of deception and sense of they are not quite who you think they are, or are they? Are you seeing something that's truthful or not? And it plays around with that a lot. It plays around with the power dynamics of how people lie to each other, and how people see the world, and how people see the world in their own particular way. But it's very expressionistic because how people kind of get obsessed with certain silly little things that become the world, and the kind of myopia that ensues, and how males tend to get attached to objects rather than people, and they kind of fall through of that, the kind of loneliness of that, the dissatisfaction of life that comes from that. And it's just an expression of the various problems in a male psyche as it goes through life, and as it tries to develop and either heal or get worse with age. Because this is not a sentimental film, this is a film about how people actually can get really horrible and really twisted and have instincts that aren't very nice. And it's instincts that even they can't quite understand a lot of the time, because they have ambitions to do things, but they've also got a reality of who they are that goes against that. And there's cruelty around them for no reason beyond just cruelty because that person's annoyed. And it's just all about that. It's all about how you invest in things that are unimportant and how you're really seeing your own doom by not facing up to who you are and what you are and trying to take advantage of that to better yourself. It's a wonderful film. It's one of my favourite films of the year. But I don't want to say that much about it beyond the plot level because part of the enjoyment is just watching the thing unravel and watching discoveries being made, and also just seeing them in this atmosphere, the black and white atmosphere of this lighthouse that's just cramped and it's old fashioned and cold, and people are stuck there. And it's with people who wouldn't really have anything to say to each other generally in real life, but now they're stuck together. And sometimes they're pals, sometimes they're enemies, and it's just this kind of cruelty and weird sense of friendship and antagonism. But the atmosphere keeps on going. It becomes every little thing in the building becomes important in a way that it's just a sign of people slowly losing it, but also just the kind of mania that the male psychology can have for objects and where it leads. So it becomes a lot more mythic and a lot more personal as it goes on, and it's just a beautiful film. It's definitely one of my favourite films of this year. It just is wonderful. So it's definitely one to see. It's beautiful. I just don't want to say much more about it because I think it's one of those films you should see it as cleanly as possible and just try and see it for what it is, but don't try and know too much before you go in. Now we go to I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is the Charlie Kaufman film which has just been released on Netflix. And it's got the same idea of male psychology and how people go through life and how they get changed by experiences or lack of experience and all the rest of it. But this is a Charlie Kaufman one, and even so, basically, I found it alienating. I found it really alienating. There's a good review Dion Wynn did that I'll link to that is a much more positive review, so I think it's fair to say see his review as well as mine so you can get a good idea of the two different approaches to this film, because his is much more enthusiastic. He really liked it and I didn't, so I think it's fair to see both reviews if you're serious about film. This is for film fans. It's not for the mainstream audience. Mainstream audience could look and go, "What the hell is this?" Because it is very self-involved. It really is, and it connects with who it doesn't. It didn't connect with me, but I found some of it interesting. I mean, a lot of the things it was discussing is things I find interesting. It's just the way they did it that I didn't find interesting. So the story basically is, but this woman, next door woman, who's going back to see the parents of this guy she's dating, who she's thinking of splitting up with, because they don't seem to be. They seem to connect sometimes, but not always. And she's not quite sure, and she's kind of depressed and kind of fed up, but she's not quite sure why. The way people are in real life. Then, as she goes to the parents, things get a bit more surreal. He shows her around a farm, which is pretty much abandoned. Then we get into the parents' home. Everything becomes fantastical. Like, time bends in weird ways. So you're having a normal conversation, and then you see the same person when they're much older or much younger. And the parents are played by Toni Collette and David Thewlis. And it's the main character played by Jessie Buckley and Jesse Plemons as the couple. But it's mainly from her point of view for the early part. For most of the film, it's from her point of view. And it's a film seemingly from her point of view. And you just watched her go through all these experiences that become more and more fantastical after they try and leave the place, try to get home, and end up going through these other experiences where you're seeing these other places that the Jesse Plemons character visits as a child, end up in his high school. And as the film goes on, you start to realise something's a bit more dubious and weird. So before getting spoiled, I'll just say I found this unsatisfying after the first half hour. The first half hour I thought was really good. The acting is good all round, a bit theatrical at times, but it's good. But in plotting, the plot level, I found it unsatisfying. I found that it made jumps to get to thematic points that could have been done better. I just felt like it had thematic ideas that I wanted to push through but didn't really work at my script level in a way that was satisfying. So it was always alienating me. So every time I got closer to the film, it would do something that would push me further back from it. And it would happen more and more as the film went on, so by the end of it I was really getting frustrated with the film. Even though I could see what it was trying to do, I just found that it was like, it just wasn't satisfying. The same way that something like Spider is satisfying, because you feel Spider knows what it was aiming for. And this one, it knows what it's aiming for, but it doesn't know how to get there, for me. I think it's the kind of narrative that does not tie in with his ambitions. Like, the narrative does seem to be a much more closed-in world, a much more psycho-ish world. It's kind of darkly funny about people being trapped in their own little traps. But I think Coffin's trying to expand that into making points about humanity and how they're linked or how they're distant from each other. And I don't think they mesh. I think they just clash against each other a lot, and I don't think Coffin found that way to tie together or to make the story dramatically interesting as it went on. At a certain point, when you're halfway through the house sequence, when they're going through the paint and going back and forth in time, I'd figured the whole thing out, and it was getting frustrating watching it. And it was not enjoyable, because I'd figured it out. The scenes going on way too long to be at the point. And it was like, a lot of the scenes were good dialogue scenes, but they didn't seem to tie together in a way that I found satisfying. It was based on a book, and I feel the book's probably more satisfying as a story than this. This just felt like you were either missing bits, or you had so many scenes going on there that was confusing everything so badly that you'll never get into the heart of the story. It just felt like it was. And then we're commenting that as well, but this is a spoiler. We're getting spoilers now. So basically, the story isn't from her point of view. It's from his point of view. She's a fantasy of some girl he didn't really guts to ask out years ago, and now he's an old giant, thinking back in his life, thinking back in his parents, thinking about what would have happened if he'd taken her back home, and his fantasy goes back and forward through what he was and what he is now as an old man who's stuck by himself. So earlier, like, you want to see these shots of this old man going through his life, which pretty much tells you it's his memories. Like, I pretty much could tell from the start, as soon as they started doing that, I was like, oh, it's about him. It was just so obvious it was about him. And then as they went back and forth in time, when he went to the parents' house, it was so obvious about him. But they were still trying to have this narrative from her point of view. So you thought, okay, maybe there's something clever going on here. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's a narrative twist that I'm not seeing that will become clever, and no, it was about him. And it was like, you signposted it so quickly, and then you just delivered that twist, and it was boring. It's trying to do other stuff there, which is frustrating to watch, because it's trying to play around with the idea of how everyone sees things very similar. People are burnt out by life. Like, she keeps on seeing her, every time you ask her what her profession is, she always thinks it's something else. And it's always tied into what he has been interested in as a child, and as he grew up, and as he get older. So suddenly she's an expert in this. So if there's someone fantasising about his perfect partner would be this, or that, or this, or that, and you can't quite choose one or the other. So that tells you that she's not a real person. But they're trying to make her a real person, and it's trying to suggest that if you take away the twist ending, that people who are married for a while or together for a while, they take on characters of each other. You can't quite tell where certain things began and certain things ended, because one gets interested in what the other person's interested in, and they become tied together in interesting ways. And the same way how humanity gets tied together in interesting ways, it's very unusual, and how we're all kind of stuck in the same kind of traps. That's why I mentioned Psycho, we're in private traps and things like that. It's trying to suggest all that within this narrative, which is going in another direction about how someone's isolated. And they don't match. They just don't match. That there's some thing missing that would have tied them together in some way that would have made it work, which doesn't come. There's sequences of him, imagine him and her dancing together, and then he keeps on saying about how you see people in real life. I mean, they're crazy in real life, but in a movie it looks fine because they're good looking. And it's just his projection, of course, he's not good looking. It's like, that's obvious. They do this weird fantasy dance towards the end, as if to say we're all seeing each other in our own way, and we're all kind of tied together. Like, everyone's experiences are similar. Everyone's going through life wondering what it's all about. But then you're tied back to this story about a guy who's a fantasist. A guy whose interactions in his head with other people are based on what he's read. So he's saying to her how he liked something, she says no, and she starts quoting a review back to him in a different voice, and he says, oh, I didn't really think of that. And then later on, she's angry with something that he said about a song that they both know. Well, she said it's sexist and rape, and he says not. So it's trying to say that people see things in different ways, but then it's putting it back and saying, no, but she's a fantasy, and he can't project outwards. He can only project so much, because, I mean, it has a feeling of being inspired by Beckett and like Crab's Last Tape, of someone looking back and seeing their failures. And also something like Solaris, which is about how even if you lose someone, you try and fantasize who they were, you're never going to get all the complexity because you only see them from one point of view. But this narrative is also saying he never actually knew in the first place, and this fantasization's very deep, based on his cultural knowledge and nothing else. An idea that we look at human beings by the way we need to see human beings, and it's not reality. So even if we try and inflict reality and suggest reality, it's still quite a distance, and you're still kind of alone. And I think the metaphor of him fantasizing it all tries to suggest we're always alone, and even if they had got together, it would have been that way as well. They would have been isolated and depressed, and there's all these other things where she's saying, like, she thought he was creepy and he's a stalker, which kind of is true, but an idea that in a romance that would be cute, but in reality it's not. And so it's trying to have it both ways, but nothing comes together. It's got lots of scenes of people quoting other things, other stories, other poems, other reviews, and in a way it's just frustrating because you know what he's doing, and it's like do your own thing. Yeah, it's really interesting that you've got a thing where you're saying, like, how people personalise something that are interesting things and personalise things that other people thought. So no matter how unique you think you are, someone else has had that thought as well. They're all tied to these thoughts and these drives that that a lot of time have already been done by someone else, but they are personal to us, even though they're not, to understand them, even though we're not the ones who created them. That's all interesting, an idea of how couples get together and how they personalise each other, and despite the flaws, they always feel together or they feel apart, depending. And everything's there, it's really interesting, but it just does not come together in a narrative sense. The narrative is boring. There's a big problem. The narrative is obvious from early on, and even though it's based on stuff that interests me, all this stuff about interests me, my mind was always wandering during this film. And the acting is very good. There's really good dialogue scenes, but you feel they're kind of weightless. They're meant to be weightless to a degree to show you how life is in this guy's head. But there's not the cleverness that you get in a Noel film that actually gives you an atmosphere and a sense of something intriguing. It's just like he's an intellectual idea, but he hasn't actually pared it down. Like, it feels like this is a 90-minute film stuck in the body of a 20-minute film. It just feels that there's a lot of stuff here that could have been cut. Like, returning home, the bit when he's at home should have been like half the length for me. And the stuff as he's going back could have been cut in half. There's lots of stuff there that could have been lost. It just feels way too long and way too self-indulgent, and it hasn't clarified itself. It just feels it needs another draft or two really to get what it's going for, and it needs an ending that actually is satisfying. Because we've all seen the whole idea of a sad old bastard before. We've all seen it. It's not intriguing. I just thought the Lighthouse did a lot better. The Lighthouse is about people interacting with other people and the frustrations of that. In this one, there's not enough frustrations because it's all in his head, or if it's not in his head in the other parts, but it is in his head, ultimately, because she's just always a fantasy of him. But you can also read that as the first half is what happens with couples, and the second half is his almost fantasy of him feeling left alone. So you could actually read it as the second half's a lie as well. I mean, and obviously the title, I think, about anything is not about her, it's not about him, it's about him dying. Suicidal. It's just obvious from the start. I hope this wasn't too rambly. As a complicated film, it's just not a successful one. Which is just frustrating because you feel that you've watched a film and you feel there's a better film here. There's a better film in this material. They just didn't find it. It just was like... And I love this kind of stuff, like kind of plastic reality, unreliable narrators. I really enjoy it. I like having layers of meaning. You have to try and work it all out. I mean, Cronenberg's been on a ton of those films, like Naked Lunch, Videodrome, Spider. He does it a lot. I really like that stuff. Plastic reality films is my thing. But this one just didn't seem to have a target that... I had a target, I just didn't have a target I knew how to reach narratively. And I feel that the twist of how it was just in his head wasn't a satisfying way around the problems this character had. I felt that I needed something else to end it. They could have had that, but could have had something more intriguing as well. That it just was missing something at the end to really bring it all together. They need to lose certain things in the middle to be clear. And I'm even talking in a scene about how there's so much about a film that has so much going on that nothing ultimately lands. For minutes, it's like, yeah, that's ultimately what the film is. It's like criticising itself. It's almost like it's been nervously doing that because it knows what it's doing, so they thought, oh, I better say this, so if someone says about it, we said it before. But that's one of those scenes that you don't need. It's like, I've got that already. And it makes it so obvious, like, haven't you figured it out yet? It's like, that's the scene where you think, are you a dummy, haven't you worked out? So I hope you enjoyed this review, this weird thing. I'm still in two minds with the film. There was good stuff in it, but it just, the narrative really bugged the hell out of me. But I hope you enjoyed it. Go and see Dion's review of it as well. That's a more positive review, so in between our 2 points of view is part of the reality of what the film is. Right, well, I'll be back with another film soon. Right, bye for now.